What if I told you that a single event, one massive uprising, shook the foundation of an entire monarchy and set the world on a new path? Imagine a country where the poor were starving, the king was out of touch, and whispers of revolution were heard in every corner of society. The French Revolution was just that, a moment that forever changed the course of history. But how did it begin, and what was its real impact? Stay tuned as we unravel the causes and consequences of one of the most profound revolutions the world has ever seen. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, is often seen as the birth of modern politics. A revolution that overthrew the monarchy, altered the balance of power, and gave rise to new ideas about liberty, equality, and fraternity. But how did this grand upheaval come to be? What were the underlying factors that led millions of people to rise against the crown? And what consequences did it have on France and the world? To understand the revolution, we must first look at the complex web of causes that led to this monumental event. Section 1. The social and economic inequality. France in the late 18th century was a land of stark inequality. The country was divided into three estates. The first estate, consisting of the clergy, the second estate, made up of the nobility, and the third estate, which represented the vast majority of the population, peasants, workers, and the bourgeoisie or middle class. While the first and second estates lived in luxury, exempt from many taxes, the third estate carried the burden of the nation's taxes. They were also suffering from rising food prices, particularly bread, which was a staple of the poor. The situation was dire. In 1788, France experienced one of the worst harvests in decades. Crops failed, bread prices soared, and hunger spread across the land. The people of France were angry. The gap between the wealthy and the poor was wide, and the conditions for the majority were unbearable. Meanwhile, the French monarchy, under King Louis XVI and his wife, Marie Antoinette, continued to live opulently, oblivious to the suffering of their people. Section 2. Financial crisis. But social inequality wasn't the only issue plaguing France. The country was also in a state of financial crisis. The French monarchy was heavily in debt. Years of costly wars, including France's involvement in the American Revolution, had drained the royal treasury. France was bankrupt, and King Louis XVI was unable to resolve the crisis. To make matters worse, the monarchy's attempts at reform were unsuccessful. In 1787, Louis XVI called the Estates General, a general assembly representing all three estates, to help solve the financial crisis. However, the third estate, made up of the common people, was underrepresented and had little power. They were frustrated with the monarchy's inability to address their grievances and their lack of political voice. This lack of representation and the burden of debt was a powder keg ready to explode. Section 3. Enlightenment ideas. Now, we need to look at a crucial element that ignited the revolution: the spread of Enlightenment ideas. Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke, Voltaire, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau have been challenging traditional power structures and promoting the idea of a government based on consent of the governed, individual freedoms, and equality. Rousseau's concept of the social contract was particularly influential. He argued that government should be based on the will of the people, not on the divine right of kings. These ideas began to spread throughout French society, particularly among the bourgeoisie, the educated middle class, who were dissatisfied with their lack of political power. As these new ideas about rights and governance gained traction, they directly challenged the old feudal system and the authority of the monarchy. The French people, inspired by these thinkers, began to demand change. Section 4. The storming of the Bastille. The tipping point came in the summer of 1789. On July 14th, a mob of Parisians, fearing the king would send troops to crush the growing unrest, stormed the Bastille, a symbol of royal tyranny. The fall of the Bastille marked the beginning of the revolution. The storming of the Bastille became a symbol of the people's defiance against the monarchy. The event sparked widespread protests and violent uprisings across France. The National Assembly, composed mostly of members of the Third Estate, declared itself the legitimate government of France and began drafting a new constitution. King Louis XVI, now facing a revolt, was forced to accept the National Assembly's demands, though he never truly gave up his absolute power. Section 5. The Reign of Terror. As the revolution progressed, things took a more radical turn. In 1793, King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were executed by guillotine. The revolutionaries, led by the radical Jacobins and figures like Maximilien Robespierre, began a violent crackdown against perceived enemies of the revolution. This period, known as the Reign of Terror, saw thousands of people executed, including political opponents, aristocrats, and anyone suspected of being counter-revolutionary. The revolution, once about liberty and equality, became increasingly about survival in the face of internal and external threats. France was embroiled in war with other European monarchies, and revolutionary leaders became paranoid about maintaining control. Section 6. The Rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. The revolution, which had begun with lofty ideals of liberty and equality, eventually gave rise to a new power, Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1799, Napoleon seized power in a coup d'etat and declared himself first consul. Just a few years later, he crowned himself Emperor of the French. Though Napoleon initially preserved many of the revolution's gains, like the abolition of feudalism and the spread of secularism, his rule was marked by authoritarianism and military conquest. He expanded the French Empire across much of Europe, but his ambitions ultimately led to his downfall. The French Revolution, in its aftermath, was a paradox. While it abolished the monarchy and established a republic, it also paved the way for a new form of autocracy under Napoleon. Section 7. Consequences of the French Revolution. The French Revolution had lasting effects both in France and around the world. Domestically, it led to the end of absolute monarchy in France and the rise of secularism. The revolution also inspired other revolutionary movements, including those in Latin America and Europe, and laid the groundwork for the modern idea of democracy. The principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, though not fully realized in the revolution itself, became guiding ideals for future generations. The revolution also marked the decline of feudalism and the rise of the bourgeoisie as a dominant class. However, the revolution also brought violence, political instability, and the rise of dictatorial power. The French Revolution was, in many ways, a cautionary tale about the dangers of radical change and the potential for power to be concentrated in the hands of one man, Napoleon. The French Revolution was one of the most transformative events in history. It was a revolution driven by social inequality, economic crisis, and new ideas about governance. Its causes were complex, but its consequences were undeniable. It reshaped France and had a ripple effect across the globe, inspiring revolutions and sparking debates about democracy, human rights, and governance that continue today. As we reflect on the French Revolution, we must remember that change, though necessary at times, can be unpredictable. The ideals of the revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity, remain important, but the path to realizing those ideals has never been straightforward. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this exploration of the French Revolution, be sure to subscribe for more historical insights and deep dives into pivotal moments in history. Until next time, remember, history is not just about the past. It's the story of how we got here and how we might shape the future